Some fundamental truths about April 15th. It happens every year, right after April 14th. Some post offices stay open late. There are usually big lines at the post offices anyway, and there's almost always tax day protests. Tax day is one of those red-letter days on the direct actionista calendar. For years, and in some places still, groups on the left have held tax day protests at the post office to make clear that they didn't want their tax dollars being spent on war. For even more years, groups on the right have protested on tax day, just against the whole idea of taxes. Anti-tax protesters over the years have ranged from your run-of-the-mill libertarians all the way to the no one has to pay taxes armed tax resistors. Last year, the Tax Day '08 protests were organized around the idea of abolishing the Federal Reserve, so we could all go back to paying for stuff with doubloons, like we learned from the secret subtext in The Wizard of Oz. Protest is as American as jazz and the rye old-fashioned. It is a part of who we are as a country. In America, we just make more or less cockamamie arguments to each other about taxes every April 15th. It's what we do, as ever it has been and as ever it shall be, as long as the Bill of Rights and the IRS shall live. What's different about this year's Tax Day protests, different this year from other years, is that this year, one of the two great political parties of the American two-party political system has decided to hitch its wagon to the Tax Day protest star, a heretofore sort of fringe tradition. It's an awkward coming together of a major political party and groups associated with those late-night how to legally pay zero taxes without going to jail infomercials, those ones that didn't work out at all for Wesley Snipes. That coming together was perhaps nowhere more awkward today than when the ambitious Republican governor of Texas, Rick Perry, told a crowd of Texas teabaggers, quote, "I'm just not real sure you're a bunch of right-wing extremists. But if you are, we're with you." As portions of the crowd chanted, "Secede, secede, secede," as in secede from the Union, the governor was asked today about secession. His answer, quote, "If Washington continues to thumb their nose at the American people, who knows what might come out of that?" Last week, Governor Perry denounced the federal government as oppressive as he signed a piece of state legislation asserting Texas's sovereignty.
I believe the federal government has become oppressive. I believe it's become oppressive in its size, its intrusion in the lives of its citizens, and its interference with the affairs of our state. We think it's time to draw the line in the sand and tell Washington that no longer are we going to accept their oppressive hand in the state of Texas. There is a point in time where you stand up and say, enough is enough.
Enough is enough, except when you got to ask for FEMA to come in to help with the wildfires like you did 5 days ago, and except when you got to call for federal troops to help out on the border like you did last month, or when you got to ask for another 1.5 years worth of federal funds for cleaning up after the hurricanes like you did a little. Other than that kind of stuff, other than the help that Texas really wants from the federal government, other than that, down with that oppressive federal government. Joining us now is Dallas Morning News senior political reporter Wayne Slater. He's the author of the book Bush's Brain, How Karl Rove Made George W. Bush Presidential. Wayne, thanks so much for coming on the show. Nice to see you.
Great to be with you, Rachel.
Now, I understand that you were at a Tea Party event today in Texas with the governor. I got to ask if it seemed like a pretty typical Republican event, or was this a less mainstream group than usual?
There were elements that were absolutely mainstream Republican, conservative Texas Republicans. You had the orthodox members of the party, political party, including the governor, who were speaking. You had good, solid Republican burghers out there, folks who don't like taxes. But what you also saw was this sort of fringe group, the secessionists, the militia types, the conspiracy theorists, sort of the marginalia of the radical right. This group is always with us, is always around. What was new today was that you had them, a group that usually comes in through the back door, really come through the front door, and the governor appealing directly to them as part of a larger political pitch.
Have you ever seen this happen before in Texas politics? Is there anything in history that would tell us what the effect on what you call the marginalia of the radical right, what the effect of this embrace from the Republican Party might be on them? We've
seen it happen a number of times in small ways. The most significant way that you can think of was back in 1964. That's ultimately what happened to the Republican Party, not only in Texas, where Lyndon Johnson was running for president, but the Republican Party nationally, where it was really appealed to the same kind of thing that Rick Perry was talking about, states' rights, which carries with it a kind of unfortunate baggage of our most recent history. States' rights was the reason that the southern states particularly argued against ending segregation. What we saw was a Republican Party that closed in on itself, embraced the most radical elements, and I guess to apply the Dr. Phil test, how did that work for you back in 1964? Not well at all.
So when Governor Perry is really running with this Texas sovereignty theme, really renouncing the federal government, on the one hand, that is a straightforward political message. But on the other hand, you're saying that sort of operates on a few different levels. That's heard a few different ways by people who are hearing that message.
Well, it really is. Obviously, you have the farthest right elements of the Republican Party, and some of these folks aren't even Republicans. As you said earlier, they're libertarians, they're third-party folks, they're folks that have pox on all political parties, basically. But to those on the Republican Party sort of solid Republican conservative base in Texas, Rick Perry is appealing to them because he's got a primary against Kay Bailey Hutchison, seen as a more moderate Republican challenger next March. And also to a number of folks in Texas, you see, who think this is a bad idea. They might be, I guess you'd call them progressives. It's the kind of thing that defines Perry possibly for national office, which is clearly something that he'd like to think about in the future, especially now when you have a Republican Party that nationally really doesn't have a clear voice, doesn't have a marginal, it doesn't have a major candidate who's emerging. And Rick Perry would like to see himself, I think, as part of that mix, and clearly is defining himself pretty far to the right.
Wayne, one last question, and I hope you hear this in the spirit in which it is intended. And I'm asking this because I know you are a savvy guy and because this has actually become sort of a serious issue about these Tea Party protests today. Did you get the sense today that anybody knew why it would be weird to use the word teabag or the word teabagging as a verb? Do you think they get that? They understand the weird implication there?
Two things. One, Rachel, I don't think anybody of the folks who I was surrounded by today watches you on MSNBC. I could be wrong, but I got a feeling they were looking at another channel when they watched, so they don't know this.
I didn't invent this idea. I'm just reflecting the culture.
I know. I turned around. There was a guy right behind me who had a tea bag hanging from his sunglasses. A woman next to him had several tea bags around her face hanging from the brim of her cap. I am convinced, Rachel, that they did not know the other implications of what they were saying.
I pray that is the case. Wayne Slater, senior political reporter with the Dallas Morning News. Thanks very much for your time tonight, Wayne. It's great to have you on the show.
Great to be